And my memento is in abeyance. You're going to have to give it to me once lockdown ends. So,
Anubhai, it is already delivered to your house. Please see the.
You will have to come down to get at the society gate.
That's right. So, good evening, everybody. And today, as Mayur Bhai mentioned, we'll be dealing with foreign investment, that is FDI and other modes. Now, when we speak of foreign investment, we have a tendency, both as professionals and as laymen, to often call it FDI. But as we will see by the end of this session, FDI is only one of the components by which you can make a foreign investment, and there are several other methods and modes by which foreign investment into India is possible. Now, as Mayur Bhai mentioned, this has been a very dynamic regulation which has seen umpteen changes. And the biggest change came in October 2019. Now, prior to October 2019, what was the position when you look at the legal ecosystem? I read a chat, somebody was asking that I'm new to the subject, what regulations should I look at? So I would always suggest go back to the basics. First is the FEMA, that is the Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999, which is the mother central statute. Then comes the consolidated FDI policy, which is issued by the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion. That's the Commerce Ministry, part of the Government of India. These two on the right-hand side, and that's why I've drawn an arrow, belong to the central government purview. And prior to October 2019, we had four parts which were by the Reserve Bank of India. So we had the FEMA regulations, popularly known as TISPRO, that is transfer or issue of security to a person resident outside India. 2017, they were issued, the revised regulations were issued in 2017. Then there was a master direction on foreign investment. There were authorized person direction circulars, which the RBI issues to various banks from time to time. And there were FAQs. So left hand quadrant belonged to Reserve Bank, right hand two buckets belong to central government. So this was the very clear division. Come 17th October 2019, what happened? The government decided to classify all foreign investment instruments into two buckets, debt and non-debt. Debt would be regulated by Reserve Bank. Non-debt, the rules would be governed by Finance Ministry, Department of Economic Affairs. So there's a clear-cut demarcation which they have come out with. What is the idea behind this? Very clearly, Finance Ministry wants to control the FDI inflows and the FDI instruments and various provisions relating to it, rather than as it was earlier governed by Reserve Bank of India. So Reserve Bank of India, instead of the earlier TISPRO regulations, now we have two regulations. That is the FEMA Debt Instrument Regulations 2019, which is notified by the Reserve Bank of India. And we have the FEMA Non-Debt Instrument Rules 2019, which is notified by Finance Ministry. So a TISPRO became a regulation as well as a rule, one by RBI, one by Finance Ministry. What is debt and what is non-debt? Let us first look at non-debt. Equity shares, capital, compulsorily convertible debentures, compulsorily convertible preference shares in all types of companies, listed, unlisted, private, public. Capital and limited liability partnership, units of infrastructure investment trust, real estate investment trust, and alternate investment funds. They also came out with one more category of mutual funds with more than 50% in equity shares investment, but that created huge turmoil in the mutual fund industry, and therefore there was a backtrack. And in December 2019, this was amended. Also, depository receipts issued against equity instruments such as ADR, GDR, they are all part of non-debt bucket, which would be governed by Finance Ministry. What is debt and what continues to be with RBI are government bonds, corporate bonds, security receipts, loans, depository receipts with underlying debt security. So if they are depository receipts which have underlying debentures, then it is part of RBI. If it has equity, it is part of non-debt. And units of mutual fund with less than 50% in equity. Since it was removed from the non-debt instrument in December, it was also removed from the debt instrument in December 2019. What is the amendment to FEMA which the government made for this bifurcation? RBI's power to regulate FDI and foreign investment in capital instruments is now taken away. This power is now vested in the central government, that is the Finance Ministry. RBI can only regulate debt instruments and not NDI. NDI means non-debt instruments. However, it's very interesting. RBI would continue to regulate the valuation and reporting for NDI instruments. So while what is NDI, how do you do it is not within RBI's purview, how to value and how to report is within RBI's purview. FEMA TISPRO have been rescinded with effect from 17th October 2019 by the NDI rules. Therefore, and these are my interpretation now, RBI can no longer issue APDIR circular on NDI rules because that is not the purview of RBI. That is the purview of the Finance Ministry. RBI had notified a master direction and frequently asked questions on foreign investment, that is the TISPRO. What is the status of that now? Since NDI rules have rescinded the TISPRO altogether. I believe there is no statutory force now of the master direction. Nevertheless, it does have persuasive value and it can help us in certain interpretation issues because the RBI notification and the master direction are very clear and exhaustive, whereas the NDI rules yet has certain gaps which they need to fill. Coming to foreign investment, as I said at the beginning of my talk, for FDI is one bucket. So if you look at the NDI rules, you would have three types of buckets into which you can classify foreign investment. Extreme left on your screen is FDI, what we popularly call it. That's under Regulation 6, read with Schedule 1. Now, a little bit of a background of the rules. They are divided into schedules. There are 10 schedules, each dealing with a different type of foreign investment. FDI is governed by Schedule 1 and then you have 2 to 10. So we'll come to 2 to 10 also, time permitting. Then you have share transfer. Now FDI is money coming into India directly from a foreign person, whereas share transfer is money changing hands between two shareholders on the floor of the exchange or on an off-market basis. That is governed by the NDI rules also. There is no separate schedule for that, however. And there are other types of foreign investment, which is part of Schedule 2 to 10. Who are the relevant agencies and regulators now under the NDI rules? Now it's the Department of Economic Affairs, Finance Ministry who notify the NDI rules. You have RBI, who is the nodal authority only for valuation and reporting. You have government ministries, different ministries for cases requiring approval. Earlier, prior to 2017, we had the Foreign Investment Promotion Board. There was a central nodal authority comprising of various representatives from different ministries. So you had someone from the Finance Ministry, someone from the Commerce Ministry, somebody from Ministry of Corporate Affairs, somebody from Income Tax. All of them put together formed the FIPB. So it was a one-stop shop which would govern all cases requiring central government approval for FDI. Now, FIPB has been disbanded and different ministries will take over different cases. We'll look at that also. And you have the DIPP, that's the Department of Industrial Policy, Ministry of Commerce, which formulates FDI policy. It has done so in 2017. After that, whenever there is any amendment, a press note has been issued by the DIPP. Now that Finance Ministry is notifying the NDI rules, I do not think there would be any scope for DIPP to now formulate an FDI policy because you cannot have two ministries of the central government dealing with the same thing. Earlier, what used to happen, it was Reserve Bank on one hand and DIPP, that is Commerce Ministry, on the other hand. So there was a clear-cut bifurcation. Now with Finance Ministry and Commerce Ministry both, I think would be a difficult thing. So we're going to have to see whether DIPP yet has any role to play in terms of issuing FDI policy. I believe no. Key changes in foreign investment regime. As I mentioned, FIPB was abolished. Online reporting was introduced a few years ago. So whenever you now need to report to RBI, there's a single master form on the firm's platform. So it's an online platform, just as all reporting in regulations are moving online. Even RBI reporting is moved online. And instead of multiple forms, there's a single master form, which is different parts. You have LSF, that is late submission fee. If you have been late in submitting the forms, instead of going in for compounding, now they have a graded late submission fee. So that lays down a scale based on which you have to pay the penalty. And lastly, in October 2019, the FEMA regulations were replaced with the NDI rules. So these are the 4 key changes which have taken place in the foreign investment regime over the last 2 to 3 years. Let's come to FDI, the big daddy of all types of foreign investment. Although there are others, this is yet the bulk of foreign investment into the country. Now, this also underwent a big change. Sometime in November 2017, they came out with a revised definition of foreign direct investment. Earlier, it meant foreign investment coming directly, as the name suggested, foreign direct investment. So it has to be foreign. It comes directly into the company and it's an investment. Now, there is a threshold. So there is a mathematical formula to define what is FDI and what is not FDI. Foreign investment in an unlisted company, that is private or public, will always be FDI. So that's a very clear-cut statement which we are making. You can have only FDI in an unlisted company. If it is a listed company, it is a company whose shares are listed on a stock exchange, and the foreign investment is 10% or more, it will always be FDI. But if the foreign investment is 9.99% or lower, that is lower than 10%, then it would be treated as foreign portfolio investment. Now that is a very important mathematical classification which the government has made. 10% above FDI, 9.99% and lower, foreign portfolio investment. Now, is foreign portfolio investment same as the foreign portfolio investor FPIs which we hear about on CNBC or ET Profit? Answer is no. A foreign portfolio investor is only one who is registered with SEBI as an FPI or who earlier was known as an FII. So when you see FII investment, it refers to SEBI registered FPIs. So that's a different class of investors who need to follow certain regulations, capital adequacy, etc. But anybody, even a non-resident Indian, an individual owning 9.99% and lower in a listed company will be treated as foreign portfolio investment. But he does not become a foreign portfolio investor as understood under SEBI. Little complicated at first blush, but if you read it in a clear frame of mind, it's very easy to understand. 9.99% and lower is foreign portfolio investment, 10% and higher is always FDI. Now, what happens if there is fresh investment of less than 10% in a listed Indian company? It is treated as foreign portfolio investment. The listed company would have to follow SEBI preferential issue regulations for issuing shares to the investor. Pricing would be as per SEBI regulations. However, reporting under FEMA will not be required. So under the single master form, which we just mentioned, there is no FCGPR reporting which is required because it is not FDI, it is foreign portfolio investment. You don't have to follow the valuation norms as governed under FEMA, but SEBI valuation norms will yet apply. If it is fresh investment by a foreign company in a listed company of 10% or more, then it is treated as FDI. Pricing for both listed and unlisted, for listed as per SEBI regulations, but reporting will also be required under the single master form. So this is the difference between FPI investment and FDI. If the 9.9% investment increases and it becomes 10% or more, then what happens to the entire investment? The entire investment becomes FDI, and now you again need to follow the reporting requirements. But if the FDI was about 10%, say it was 11%, and the investor sold 2% and now came down to 9% or 9.99, does FDI become portfolio? No. Once FDI, always FDI. Once foreign portfolio can become FDI. So FDI cannot degrade to a lower status. Foreign portfolio can upgrade to a higher FDI status. It normally is in the form of fresh issue, private placement, rights issue to non-resident. Money comes directly into the Indian company. However, you can also have FDI via stock market operations. So foreign promoters of listed companies, in lieu of dividend payable to the foreign promoter, can issue shares to itself, and that would be treated as FDI. To give you an analogy, Unilever Limited of UK, 51% shareholder in Hindustan Unilever Limited, a listed company. it's entitled to a huge chunk of dividend. It says, I don't want to burden my subsidiary with cash outflow. Instead of that, let me use that to make a creeping acquisition of 3% in Hindustan Unilever. So in lieu of the dividend of 300-400 crores which are due to me, I'll buy shares worth that amount in HUL. That would also be treated as FDI for HUL, and HUL would have to file the single master form and follow various reporting requirements under the FEMA regulations. Regulators and agencies, we already mentioned, but again rephrasing: Government of India, Finance Ministry, Department of Economic Affairs frames the rules. RBI, Exchange Control Department, would be the nodal authority for reporting and valuation. Who can invest? Now, FDI, the biggest question is who can be the investor? So any non-resident entity, it could be a company, it could be a LLP, it could be an individual, it could be a partnership firm, an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp as known in America. Anybody can invest. However, there are certain red flags. A Bangladeshi and a Pakistani citizen can only invest by government route. That is, they need to take government permission. They cannot come in directly on an automatic route. What is automatic and what is government, we'll deal with in a few slides. Pakistani citizens and entities, even with government approval, cannot invest in sensitive sectors like defense, aerospace, atomic energy. So these are no-go for these citizens and entities. Erstwhile overseas corporate bodies. Now, this is something which those of us who were practicing FEMA prior to 2000 will remember. We had the OCB scenario where a non-resident Indian was owning 60% or more of the capital of a corporate body in Mauritius or such countries. It was treated as an overseas corporate body. This was banned after the stock market scam of 2000, but they can yet invest under FDI with government approval, provided they are not on RBI's watch list. You also have a SEBI registered category of foreign venture capital investors. So you have several venture capital investors abroad who are treated as FVCIs, that is foreign venture capital investors. If they want to invest under the FDI route, they can, but then they need to maintain clear-cut bifurcations. There's a separate schedule, Schedule 7 for FVCIs. When we come to that, I'll again deal with them in detail. Mayurbhai mentioned even during lockdown, there has been regulation amendment, and that's a COVID takeover. This is probably one of the regulations which has been impacted, or the government feels it's been impacted the most by COVID. What has happened? There is a fear that certain countries or companies belonging to certain countries with whom India shares a land border may use this depressed market scenario to take over Indian companies and become owners of such companies. To put a long story short, this is to prevent Chinese takeovers. So the government, and the trigger point was People's Bank of China acquiring 1.01% in HDFC Bank. Government does not want an Italian type scenario where majority of Indian companies end up being owned by China. And this is where the regulations have been amended, that an entity of a country, and it's not just China, but the primary target is China, which shares a land border with India, or where the beneficial owner of an investment into India is situated in, or is a citizen of any such country. So even a citizen of any such country is covered, or there is a direct or indirect transfer of ownership of any FDI in an Indian entity, resulting in Indian beneficial ownership belonging to such citizen or entity of a country, that is of China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, etc., then it will require government approval. So they are not banning it. They are not saying no. All that they are saying, please come to us for approval. We want to ensure all our security covenants are in place. We want to ensure that there's a clear path, and we want to know who's behind this. So even if there is a direct or an indirect transfer of ownership, very important words, resulting in beneficial ownership as above. Now, they've used very heavily loaded words, but unfortunately have not defined it. Now, what is the meaning of beneficial ownership? The FEMA regulations do not deal with this term. One possible way to look at it is that when FEMA does not deal with something, you go to the Companies Act. And the Companies Act, Section 89 and 90, deal with significant beneficial ownership. In fact, that was one regulation which again created a lot of turmoil under the Companies Act. So we may look at the beneficial ownership clause which is there under the Companies Act and then give it some color to the FDI rate. So basically they are saying look up through the chain, and if you can see that at the top there is somebody who is sharing a land border with India, then you please come to us for approval. What are the issues which may arise because of this? Is anything to be done for existing investments? Answer is no. This is only for fresh investments which these companies or countries want to make into India. Is there a threshold above which government approval is required? No. So even for a basic small investment coming in from China, you would need to get government approval. And there are lots of Indian unicorns and startups which have Chinese investments. All of them would have to relook at their funding strategy. What about Hong Kong or Macau? Are they at par with China because there are special administrative regions which are governed by the Chinese government? I believe yes, that the government would look at Hong Kong also as a part of China. Although we have a separate double tax avoidance treaty with Hong Kong. So from an income tax perspective, China is different and Hong Kong is different. But I think when it comes to looking at it from a FDI perspective, they may club Hong Kong and Macau also with China. Can companies with existing Chinese investment raise further funds without government approval? No. What has been done is done. Anything further will require approval. Interesting. What if the foreign parent of an Indian company gets acquired by a Chinese company? So say there is a Singaporean company which has invested in an Indian company. Now the Singaporean company gets acquired by a Chinese company. And then the Indian company wants further funds from Singapore. Do I need to go to the government of India? Look at it, is directly or indirectly the beneficial ownership being owned by China? Answer is yes, because indirectly the chain of thought takes you right up to the ultimate beneficial owner. And if I apply the significant beneficial ownership test of the Companies Act Section 90, answer is yes. So then on that ground, you would require government approval. Problems would arise if there are private equity funds or venture capital pooled funds which have Chinese investors. Do all of them again need FDI need permission? Could be yes, because indirect ownership is again with China. So these restrictions would apply even if ultimate parent company is Chinese but direct investor is non-Chinese. So that's a big amendment which came out just a few days ago. Which are the entities into which FDI is possible? Company, that's private, public, unlisted or listed. Partnership firm, sole proprietor. You can even have FDI in them. Limited liability partnerships, LLPs are one vehicle, although not very popular because there are lots of caveats. Though startup company is also a company, I've classified it separately because there are a lot of relaxations for a startup company. Types of FDI. So you have two types of FDI which is possible, automatic and approval. Automatic, as the name suggests, only filings to be done post facto with the Reserve Bank of India, no permission required. So it's a green channel. Just as in customs, you have green channel and red channel. Unfortunately, my box's color has got changed. Red is automatic and green is approval. It should have been the other way around. Approval is where it's a red channel. You need government approval from various nodal ministries. And if the FDI is so big, that is it's 5,000 crores and above, then you need Cabinet Committee of Economic Affairs approval. That's called CCEA, which is headed by the PMO itself. So these are really, really big cases, like when Etihad Airways had invested into Jet Airways years back. It was a CCEA case and that required Cabinet Committee approval. Everything else below 5,000 crores, there are various government ministries which have to give their approval. What are the instruments which are possible for FDI? You have a mix. You have equity, which could be fully paid up or partly paid up. You have hybrids, that is quasi-equity shares, that is compulsorily convertible debentures, compulsorily convertible preference, and warrants, and convertible notes. Equity shares must be issued for cash, that is the shares must be issued for cash, or it must be expressly allowed by the FDI policy. What are the considerations other than cash which is allowed? Conversion of external commercial borrowing, that is loans or royalty, into equity shares. So if you have a loan payable to a foreign lender, instead of repaying it and having a cash drain, you can issue shares in lieu of that, and that would be allowed. Pre-incorporation expenditure of a wholly owned subsidiary. So in lieu of that, you can issue shares. Import of capital goods and machinery. So if there are any capital goods which you have imported into the country and you have to pay for that, instead of repaying the supplier in cash, you can issue shares. Share swap if Indian company is an automatic route sector. This is a mechanism which has been used extensively by the Indian IT companies. To give you an example, Infosys acquired several companies in USA. These were small companies, startups, IT-enabled services, which were plugging various gaps in Infosys's arsenal. So what they did is they bought out the shares of the US company based in California, Silicon Valley. Instead of paying cash to the shareholders of that company, they issued shares in Infosys Technologies Limited to the shareholders of that US company. So the US company promoters became shareholders of Infosys. Infosys became the wholly owned shareholder of that US company. No cash outflow. That's known as a share swap. So that is allowed provided the Indian company FDI recipient is in an automatic route sector. So if it is in a sector where you need government permission, then you would not be allowed to do it on an automatic route, but you can do so with a government approval. Any other case of consideration other than cash will require government approval. Now, shares must be issued within 60 days of receipt of fund. The moment the funds hit your bank account, the foreign investment hits your bank account, you need to issue shares within 60 days, or else you need to refund them after 75 days. That is, you get a 15 days grace. After that, you start repaying with interest. Earlier, it was 180 days within which you needed to issue the shares. But the Companies Act 2013 amended the Companies Act to make it 60 days, and there was a mismatch. Now it has been brought on par. It is 60 days both under the Companies Act as well as under the FEMA regulations. Valuation, very, very important criteria when you look at FDI. The issue price of FDI shares for listed companies must be as per the SEBI preferential issue pricing guidelines, which have been laid down under the SEBI ICDR regulations of 2009. Chapter 73 to 76 deal with preferential issue. Unlisted company, it's any internationally accepted pricing methodology. You need a certificate from a chartered accountant or a merchant banker. Important, no method is now specified. We started off earlier with the CCI valuation. Those of us who remember CCI, that's Controller of Capital Issues. It had an average of profit earning and NAV. Then we moved on to DCF valuation. So DCF was mandatory till a few years ago, but that one size fit all did not work. So if you were a bank or an NBFC, it was very difficult to do a DCF. So therefore, now the government says, okay, we are not going to tell you what method to follow. Let the valuer decide. It could be any internationally pricing method. It could be DCF, net asset value, comparable company method, book value, price to book value multiple, liquidation value, sum of total parts for holding companies. Let the valuer decide. Important criteria, no assured returns to be given, and valuation should be on an arm's length pricing basis. It's very important here, since many of the chartered accountant friends would be doing valuation, be very clear why you are adopting a certain valuation methodology. Otherwise, you may be questioned if you just blindly adopt a method. RBI may ask you a question. Put down your assumptions very clearly. Keep your working papers very clearly with you, because there have been several cases where not just RBI, even Enforcement Directorate, even CBI, even Economic Offence Wing Police has questioned valuers for FDI on what basis have you done the valuation. So be very clear in paperwork. As with all attestation and audit functions, valuation also requires very clear paperwork. If you look at the Supreme Court's judgment in Amrapali property development, they've come down heavily on the valuation, which they say was not done properly, and proper pricing, etc. was not done. It's worth reading that judgment, how Supreme Court has dissected valuation from FEMA angle. So I always request everybody, please be very clear. If valuation, you find it difficult to follow, don't get into stuff, because this is something which sometimes becomes a criminal angle, and that's when we could fall into trouble. Coming to quasi-equities. So you have compulsorily convertible preference shares and compulsorily convertible debentures. The instruments would be treated as equity only if the debentures or the preference shares are compulsorily, fully, mandatorily convertible. Partly convertible, optionally convertible, redeemable preference shares are not treated as equity. Prior to 2007 June, they were treated, but post that they are treated as loan. There is no maximum coupon rate, no dividend rate, no ceiling on cost like foreign loan for CCDs or preference shares. A few years ago, we had 3% over SBI's prime lending rate as the maximum dividend which could be paid on compulsorily convertible preference. That's been done away with. There are no end-use restrictions for CCDs like there are for foreign loan. But what is the valuation? How do you value a convertible? Either you value it upfront, that you give a fixed price, or you have a formula. And the formula needs to be specified today. You may convert it at maybe 1, 2, 3 years later. And what must be the minimum conversion price? Not lower than the fair market value as on issue date. What is the issue date? Today. And what is the FMV? Any internationally accepted pricing method. Now, one important other law to bear in mind when you're looking at CCP and CCD and equity shares, also consider the provisions of the Income Tax Act, Section 56(2)(7)(b, Section 56(2)(10), and transfer pricing. All of these need to be borne in mind when you're doing a valuation. Also look at the Companies Act requirements when you're doing a valuation or issuing FDI. FEMA is not an island. FEMA works in synthesis with other regulations. So do consider those other regulations also. What may be good for the goose may not be good for the gander. So you shouldn't end up making a mistake here by plugging a hole there. Partly paid up shares and warrants. Now, partly paid up shares, as the name suggests, are shares which are paid up in part, that is calls made in portion. It's available on an automatic route. 25% is to be paid upfront and balance within 12 months, else the 25% is forfeited. Under the FEMA TISPRO regulations, you could receive this later than 12 months also if the issue size was over 500 crores and there was a monitoring agency. Now, this provision is removed under NDI rules. So I don't know whether it's any longer possible. I would think no, because now NDI rules are supreme. So what's not there is not permissible. Warrants, automatic route, 25% upfront, here balances within 18 months. Now here, there's been a beneficial amendment. Under TISPRO, that's the earlier regulations, issue of warrants had to be in accordance with SEBI regulations, that is the ICDR regulations. That meant unlisted companies could not issue share warrants. This condition is now removed under the NDI rules. Therefore, an unlisted company can also issue a warrant because the Companies Act does permit even an unlisted company to issue warrants. So I believe that whatever was there under TISPRO not being there under NDI rules, you can now do away with TISPRO and follow what's there under the NDI rules. Convertible notes. As I mentioned, startups get a little beneficial treatment. Now, if you recall 3 slides ago, I mentioned optionally convertible debentures are not possible, but for startups, they are possible. So FDI through convertible notes, it's like an optionally convertible debenture. It's initially debenture, but it's either repayable or convertible. So either you repay, like in case of a debenture, or you convert it into shares at the holder's option, or you keep it event-based. That is, you make a milestone-based conversion, that if I reach as projected, it will be converted. If I don't reach as projected, you will repay it. You have maximum 5 years for exercising the conversion option, and investment must be 25 lakhs or more in a single tranche of investment. Equity shares must be as per entry route, sectoral cap, pricing guidelines. So you can't do away with all of that. The only flexibility which they are giving the investor in a startup is you could either convert or you could redeem. And what is a startup? Startup is a company so recognized by DIPP Startup Cell, and you need to follow the procedure, then only you would become a startup. FDI prohibited, taboo. 7 sectors where even government cannot allow you to come in. Chit funds and nidhi, agriculture and plantations. Now, this has been one gray area always. There are certain operations where agriculture and plantation is allowed, like horticulture, floriculture, growing of mushrooms, etc. So all that you can, but otherwise you cannot buy a land to carry out agricultural operations. Few years ago, when the Commonwealth Games came to India, one of the large real estate international companies entered into a JV with an Indian company. And what they did is that the JV bought agricultural land converted it into non-agricultural, that is any land, and built the Commonwealth Village on that. Huge violation of FEMA because you cannot use FDI to buy agricultural land. Enforcement Directorate initiated proceedings and the matter is yet going on. There's a huge penalty which has been slapped on the company. So do not buy agricultural land and then convert it into NA with FDI money. You may have an aggregator who buys it, converts it into NA, and then you may buy it with the FDI money. Real estate business, I'll explain that on the next slide. Gambling, lottery, casinos, including online gambling, all of that is prohibited from an FDI perspective. Atomic energy, tobacco and related products, so cigarette, BDs, pipes, those are on taboo. And sectors not open to private sectors, railways. That's a sector not yet open to private sector. So you cannot get FDI in railways unless the government makes a specific amendment. Real estate business, one of the sectors which has seen maximum controversies when it comes to an FDI perspective. What is the meaning of real estate business? It defines it as dealing in land and or immovable property with a view to earning profits. So it would include land, building, and immovable property with a view to earning profits. So if you are a mere dealer in land and building, then, and you're just buying and selling without any value addition, that's treated as real estate business. What is permissible? That is what is not real estate business. Development of township, construction of residential, commercial, malls, roads, infrastructure, recreational facilities, old age homes, hotels, schools, all of that is not real estate business. That's construction activity. Investment in real estate investment trust, REIT, that is allowed. Very important relaxation 3 years ago. Earning of rent on lease of property not amounting to transfer. So if you use FDI for getting a property on lease, then that's permissible. And real estate broking services. So you have several MNC property brokers. If there is any FDI in that, that is allowable and it's not treated as real estate business. Sectoral caps. FDI is permitted up to sectoral caps, if any. If there are no caps, then 100% FDI is allowed on automatic route. Now, what is sectoral cap? There are some sectors, very few now, where the government restricts FDI to say 49% or 74%. To give you an analogy, scheduled air traffic, that is any airline like Jet Airways, or sorry to use that, SpiceJet or Indigo, the FDI allowed is 100%, but only 49% is on an automatic route. Balance is allowed with government. So there is a sectoral cap of 49% for automatic route. For balance, you need to go to the government. There are some sectors where like banking or defense, where there is an even lower sector which cannot be exceeded. Total foreign investment cannot exceed the sectoral cap. If there is a minimum capitalization requirement, then share premium is also counted as a part of this. So in the case of financial services, other financial services, there is a minimum capitalization requirement of $20 million or $2 million. That would include the share premium. What if there is an FDI in a company which has not yet started operations? We won't use the term shell company because that would have different connotations. But we'll say a stillborn company which has not yet started operations. It would be automatic FDI if the activities are under automatic route. So if the company intends to carry out IT services, or the company intends to carry out manufacturing, or the company intends to carry out consultancy, then you don't need any permission. But when the operations commence, the company needs to ensure that sectoral caps and conditions are complied with. Onus of compliance is on the Indian investee company. FDI on approval route, apply to the relevant nodal ministry. If there is a doubt, DIPP would determine who is the relevant authority. If there is any rejection, the nodal authority plus DIPP both need to reject. So DIPP has been given the important veto vote. Online filing of application is to be done on FI, Foreign Investment Facilitation Portal.gov.in, that's FIFP. Comments by the nodal authority within 4 weeks, or else it is deemed to have no comments. That's an important leeway provided. For certain sensitive sectors like defense, space, aviation, telecom, Home Ministry comments also needed. This is a list of nodal authorities. So for print media, to give an example, it's Ministry of Information. FDI and Telecom is Department of Telecom. Core Investment Company, Department of Economic Affairs. Countries of concern, wherever like the COVID takeover, China, then it would go to the DIPP. FDI in an investment company. FDI in companies investing in other companies. So for instance, Tata Sons. It's a core investment company. It's a company investing in other companies. Government approval, Department of Economic Affairs required for core investment companies, and they also need to comply with the directions of the RBI issued by the Department of Non-Banking Services, that's DNBS, core investment company regulations, and even for NBFCs not registered with the RBI. Both of these need prior approval of DEA for FDI. But if it's an NBFC registered, so like a systemically important non-deposit taking NBFC, SIND, then you do not need any permission and you can get automatic route approval for the FDI. FDI in financial services undergone a lot of changes. FDI up to 100% is allowed in certain financial services subject to conditions. So this includes stock exchanges, commodity exchanges, banks, private banks, etc. 100% automatic FDI is allowed in other financial services if they are regulated by financial regulators, that is SEBI, RBI, IRDA. So a broker, a merchant banker, a commodity broker, an NBFC registered with RBI, money changer, all of these who are regulated by a financial regulator, 100% automatic route FDI, they need to follow the minimum capital prescribed by that regulator, and RBI or the government has nothing further to see from an FDI perspective. But if it's a financial service activity which is not regulated by any regulator, or there is a doubt regarding regulatory oversight, then it's 100% FDI on a government route. That is, you need to go to government for permission, subject to conditions and minimum capitalization. $20 million for fund-based activities, $2 million for non-fund. What are fund-based and non-fund? Merchant banking, PMS, broking, asset management, venture capital, all that is fund-based. Investment advisory, financial consultancy, forex, money changing, credit rating, these 5 are non-fund. So if they are not regulated again, and they are other financial services, then only you need to follow this. Otherwise, you go as per the SEBI, RBI or IRDA, that is Insurance Regulatory Classification. Yesterday only there was a press release amending the FDI regulations for insurance regulatory advisors and intermediaries. So that's a recent amendment which just came out yesterday. Downstream or indirect FDI, a very important provision which came in June 2013, or rather before that also in 2009. This came in 2013. So normally when we look at FDI, you have a foreign investor, that's the pink block, which is investing in the Indian company, which is the sky blue block. Now that what happens if that Indian company invests in another Indian company? So it is treated as indirect FDI under certain situations only. What are those situations? FDI via Indian company owned and controlled by resident Indian citizens. Domestic investment not counted as FDI. So if the Indian company one is treated as owned and controlled ultimately by resident Indian citizens, only place in FEMA where citizenship comes into play. Otherwise, FEMA does not look at citizenship. I think in your first lecture when Manoj Shah took it, he gave a very clear bifurcation that FERA used to look at citizenship for various things. FEMA does not. So FEMA, this is one of the places where you look at citizenship. Other is when you come to buying immovable property. I think the FEMA NDI rules is possibly the only one where citizenship comes into play. So it should be owned and controlled by resident Indian citizens, not even companies, not LLP. It should be individuals having Indian passports and residing in India. Then the entire downstream investment is treated as domestic. So it is not treated as FDI, not treated as indirect FDI. However, if the first level company is either owned or controlled, or owned and controlled by non-residents, then it is treated as indirect FDI. Now, what is the meaning of owned or ownership or control? If more than 50% of the capital, that is 50.01% of the capital, is owned or by the non-residents, it is treated as owned by non-resident. If more than 50.01 is owned by Indians, it is treated as owned by Indians. What is control? Right to appoint a majority of the directors. That's a simplistic one. Or any control which you can exercise by virtue of shareholders agreement, management rights, or voting rights, that would be treated as control. Both ownership and control, twin conditions, have to be with Indians. Only then it is treated as Indian investment, else it is treated as indirect. What is the percentage of indirect FDI which would be there in the second level company? Let us look at an example where control is entirely with residents. So majority of board, shareholders, everything is resident. Only FDI percentage is changing under 3 scenarios. In first case, 40% in the first level company is owned directly by non-resident. The first level company in turn owns 51% shares of the second level company. Is it indirect FDI? Answer is no, because majority of the ownership, 50% and more, 60% in this case, is controlled by resident, and entire control is with resident. So therefore, it is not indirect FDI. In the second case, 75% is owned and controlled by non-resident, and 26% is held in the second level company. Here, the entire 26% would be treated as indirect FDI because the first level is owned and controlled by non-resident. What if the second level company is a wholly owned subsidiary of the first level Indian company, which has 60% shareholding by non-resident? Here, the SPV, that is the second level company, is a mirror image. So what is the FDI in the first level becomes the FDI in the second, even though it is a wholly owned subsidiary, and hence only 60% would be treated as indirect FDI. Now, certain important provisions. These provisions first came out via Press Note 2, 3, and 4 of 2009, issued by the Commerce Ministry in February 2009. Therefore, all old indirect FDI prior to 13 February has been grandfathered. Nothing was to be done. All indirect FDI between 13 February 2009 to 21st June 2013, RBI was to be intimated of them by October 2013. And after 21st June 2013, these rules have to be followed, which were earlier under FEMA-TISPRO, now under the NDI rules. What must a second level investee company bear in mind? It must follow the entry route conditions. So as we looked at, if it is an approval route, it requires approval. Sectoral caps need to be followed. Pricing guidelines, as if it has come from abroad, you need to follow, and other FDI linked performance condition. So it's whatever you can do directly, you have to follow the same when you do indirect. Onus of compliance is on the first level investor company. It must have a board resolution approving the indirect FDI. It must have a shareholders agreement with the second level indirect company approving the FDI. It must not raise domestic funds for making the downstream investment. Very important. You cannot raise equity or debt and use that for making a downstream investment if you are a company owned and controlled by non-residents. You can only use internal accruals, that's profits, or foreign fresh funds. So this is an important embargo when it comes to utilization of funds. And this is the company which is responsible for complying with the FEMA regulations. It must obtain an auditor's certificate that it is complied with the indirect FDI rules, and it must make a report to this effect in the director's report. If there is a qualification in the auditor's report, then RBI's regional office must be intimated. Very important, auditors understand indirect FDI very clearly, or in case of doubt, obtain an opinion. Please do not issue blanket opinions without understanding. I have seen cases where auditors have then fallen into problem and companies have fallen into bigger problem. Indirect FDI is something which is viewed very seriously, and then there would be compounding and series of actions against the company, and auditor also gets dragged in. So please be very clear and cautious when issuing this certificate. And do not forget to inform the same in the director's report, because that's another requirement which is there on the company. Coming to other forms of foreign investment, rights issue and bonus issue, they are also part of FDI. If you are a foreign person owning Indian shares and the Indian company makes a rights for a bonus, then the foreign person is entitled to acquire them also on an automatic route. important that the offer of right or bonus is on an automatic, is as per the Companies Act 2013. However, the post-issue sectoral caps must not be breached. That is, if there is a sectoral cap, then both the original plus the rights and or bonus must be within the limit. Original shares must have been acquired either as per the FEMA regulations or as per FERA. You could be owning them prior to FEMA, that is prior to 2000, and yet you would be entitled to the rights. The rights pricing is very important. If it's a listed company, SEBI gives you free pricing and you can follow that pricing. If it's an unlisted company, the rights issue price to the non-resident must be same as that and cannot be lower than the price for the resident. It could be higher, but it cannot be lower. Repatriability provisions are those applicable to the original shares. If the original shares are non-repatriable, these would also be non-repatriable. What is repatriable? Non-repatriable means you can only take back interest and dividend. Repatriable means you can take back the original investment as well as the capital gains. Now, two provisions which were there under TISPRO regulations but not in NDI rules. A non-resident can acquire rights shares renounced by a resident in favor of a non-resident, and he can make an oversubscription by using renounced rights. Can you do this or can you not? Now, this has a very checkered history. Even under the FEMA TISPRO, they came in very late, and earlier, whenever there was a rights issue, and earlier means I'm saying close to 7-8 years ago, whenever there was a rights issue, we used to go to RBI for specific permission for renunciation in favor of non-residents for oversubscription, as looking at it from an abandoned caution rule. Then TISPRO regulations got amended sometime in 2015 when this came into the regulations. Now again, NDI rules have taken it away. As I mentioned, if it's not there in NDI rules, can you rely on the TISPRO earlier and the master direction? Looks difficult because what's not there, this is an old rule and it has been rescinded. So therefore, looks difficult to rely on TISPRO and master direction. Now again, this may be something where we will need clarification. And unfortunately for this, you can't go to RBI because RBI does not have powers to allow this. And there is no ministry which allows you, on a case-by-case basis. So unless NDI rules get specifically amended, may be difficult to go in for renunciation, or else finance ministry has to come out with a specific dispensation. Coming to other types of foreign investment other than FDI. As I mentioned, there are various schedules. Starting from the bottom, ESOPs and merger, that's one type in which you can do a foreign investment. Investment in a sole proprietary or a partnership firm. Schedule 2, foreign portfolio FPI. Schedule 3, non-resident investor portfolio investment. Schedule 4, non-repatriable non-resident investment. Schedule 5, other non-resident investment. Schedule 6, limited liability partnership foreign investment. Schedule 7, foreign venture capital investment. Schedule 8, investment vehicle. Schedule 9 and 10, depository receipts. Let's start with mergers and ESOPs. Indian companies can issue ESOPs or sweat equity to non-resident employees or non-resident directors of themselves, of their holding company, of their joint venture, or of their subsidiary. The scheme, that is the ESOP scheme or the sweat equity, must be as per SEBI regulations or Companies Act. For Companies Act, you follow regulations, the rules for share capital rules and debentures 2014. For listed companies, you follow the SEBI ESOP regulations 2017. ESOP must be within sectoral caps applicable to the company. Earlier, there was a limit of 5% on ESOP that has now been deleted. So now you can follow it up to the foreign sectoral caps. If the FDI is on a government route, then ESOP would also require central government approval. For instance, non-resident ESOP in private security agencies. So something like a TOPS group or a Tiger, which wants to issue ESOP to its non-resident employees, it would need government approval. ESOP to Pakistani or Bangladeshi citizen, central government approval. So these are the provisions when you look at foreign investment via ESOP or sweat equity. Merger and demerger, two Indian companies coming together can issue shares to non-resident shareholders under a scheme of merger, demerger, or reconstruction. The percentage of non-resident shareholding in the transferee company or the amalgamated company within sectoral caps or as per central government approval if any, that is if it's under the automatic or government route, comply with the entry routes and investment limits. Important that both the companies, the transferor and the transferee, are not in FDI prohibited sectors like gambling and casinos. That's a sector in which you cannot have a merger, demerger and issue shares to a non-resident. And the scheme must be approved by NCLT in India under section 230 to 232 of the Companies Act 2013. Scheme of arrangement, this is a part of debenture regulations, but I'm covering it here because earlier it was part of TISPRO. So many times what happens is Indian companies issue non-convertible redeemable preference shares or redeemable debentures in lieu of dividend to their shareholders. Hindustan Lever, National Thermal Power Corporation, ZTV, Blue Dart, all had issued bonus NCDs or RPS. How is it done? It's a scheme of arrangement approved by NCLT under 232 of the Companies Act. You pay dividend distribution tax earlier. Now the shareholders will pay tax on dividend. And then the company can issue bonus RPS or bonus debentures. However, the FEMA regulations allow that even though it is redeemable preference shares, even though they are redeemable debentures, because it is under a scheme in lieu of dividend, but the company must not be in a sector where FDI is banned. So tobacco and gambling, these could be two examples which come to mind where you cannot do this kind of a scheme. Non-repatriable foreign investment. Now, this is an interesting mode of foreign investment. Non-repatriable, as I said, means only dividend and interest can be sent back. You cannot repatriate, that is send back the principal and capital gains. However, if you are a non-resident Indian or an overseas citizen of India, you can buy shares, compulsory debentures or warrants on a non-repatriable basis. The investment would not be foreign investment. It would be treated as domestic. What are the restricted sectors? Not in Nidhi, chit fund, plantations, farmhouse, dealing in TDR or real estate business. Now, very important to bear in mind, the 7 taboos which we looked at in FDI do not apply here. Here there is a separate taboo list. So what is not permissible under FDI is permissible under Schedule 4. Each schedule works in a separate silo. There is a separate watertight bucket. What is in 1 does not apply to 2. What is in 2 does not apply to 1. What is in 1 does not apply to 4 and vice versa. So they are all separate watertight compartments. You cannot intermingle, cannot commingle. You follow the rules which are mentioned for that particular schedule. If there is no rule, then no other provision is applicable. Which are the types of instruments in which you can invest on a non-repatriable basis? Listed securities, unlisted securities, investment vehicles, that's REITs, AIF, infrastructure trust, capital of an LLP, convertible note, sole proprietary firm, and partnership firm capital. Very important restriction. Investment treated as domestic, but instrument yet has to be as per FDI regulation. So you cannot have party convertible debentures, you cannot have preference shares which are redeemable, you cannot have optionally convertible. You must follow the capital instruments mentioned for FDI, but the investment is treated as domestic. Who is it open to? Non-resident Indians, that's Indian passport holders residing abroad, or overseas citizen of Indian card holders, OCI card holders. If it's a PIO, that's a person of Indian origin who has not got an OCI card holder, then he cannot avail of Schedule 4. So just as you need an Aadhaar in India, you need an OCI for getting benefit of Schedule 4. A foreign company, a foreign trust, or a partnership firm owned and controlled by NRIs. It does not mention foreign LLP owned and controlled by NRIs. What happens to that? Further, what is the definition of owned and controlled by NRIs? Interestingly, Schedule 4 is silent on that. So then you go back to the rules and you look at it from the indirect FDI perspective. That is 50% or more than 50% of share capital or LLP is beneficially owned by NRIs, and the right to control must be majority with NRIs. Here it's reverse. There, if it was majority with residents, it was not treated as domestic. Here, if it is majority with NRIs and it is non-repatriable, only then it is treated as domestic. What are the differences between Schedule 4 and FDI? No pricing norms. Biggest distinction, you don't need to follow any pricing norms. So no internationally accepted pricing methodology. No single master form FCGPR to be filed for it, unlike for FDI. Not counted for direct and indirect foreign investment limits for ownership and control. And big gateway, can invest in multi-brand retailing, telecom, airlines, tobacco, gambling, lottery, sectors not yet open to private investment. All of this, which is not possible under FDI, is possible under non-repatriable foreign investment. Where must the sale proceeds go then? It must be credited to the NRO account. It cannot go to FCNR. It cannot go to NRE account. It must go to NRO account of the NRI. However, the FEMA regulations also allow $1 million repatriation from NRO account. So in a sense, even though it is non-repatriable, you are allowed a $1 million per financial year repatriation. Partnership firms and limited liability partnerships. FDI and sole proprietary concerns and partnership firms. You can even get FDI in setting up a sole proprietary concern. So a non-resident Indian or an OCI can set up a sole proprietary concern or invest in a partnership firm in India. There's an express prohibition for all other foreign investment in firms, sole proprietors and AOPs. Now, FEMA TISPRO 2017 first time covered an AOP. So till then AOP was not recognized under FEMA. Now it is expressly provided that AOPs cannot get FDI, but it is permissible with RBI permission, which should be given in consultation with Finance Ministry. So you can get set up an FDI, set up an AOP with FDI. There were earlier certain express permissions which have now been removed. NRIs could set up, invest in partnership firms and proprietary concerns on a repatriation basis. And other investors could also invest on a non-repatriable basis with permission. Now, both of these have been done away with. What are the restricted sectors for NRI investment in partnership firms and sole proprietary? Agricultural, plantation, real estate business, and print media. So these are the 5 taboos, not what you have the 7 taboos under FDI regulation. So each schedule comes out with its own taboo list. Depending on the type of investment, you need to look at the type of red flags. Don't mix one with the other. LLP, Schedule 6. Now, LLP is a vehicle which is very tax friendly because there is single point taxation. Now, of course, even in companies, there is single point taxation, but there are certain other benefits when you look at from an FDI, from a tax perspective. There is no MAT, and it's ease of compliance when you look at it from a Companies Act perspective. However, I've often noticed that there is a tug of war, interministerial tug of war when it comes to an LLP. What is preferred by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is not so preferred when it comes to the Finance Ministry. And therefore, LLPs always get stepmotherly treatment when it comes to FDI. What you can do in a company, you cannot do in an LLP. LLP FDI is only possible if there are various conditions. First, 100% FDI must be allowed in that sector. So if it is somewhere where 74% is allowed, 49, no LLP vehicle can be used. Automatic route FDI must be possible only, no government route FDI. And most important, no FDI linked performance conditions. So the troika of conditions need to be fulfilled for FDI in an LLP. Automatic route, green channel, 100%, no FDI linked performance conditions. First two are easy to understand. What is FDI linked performance conditions? It means sector specific conditions in Schedule 1 for companies receiving foreign direct investment. So if in Schedule 1, that is that schedule dealing with FDI, there are various conditions laid down for getting FDI, which need to be fulfilled either before or after, then you cannot get it in a LLP, you can get it in the company. So if you look at cash and carry wholesale trading, if you look at single brand retail trading, if you look at non-banking financial companies, if you look at real estate, look at housing, look at trading, look at B2C e-commerce, look at B2B e-commerce. All of these have performance linked FDI conditions, and therefore you cannot use an LLP for these. Repeating myself, cannot use an LLP for housing, finance, trading, or real estate. the 4 most valuable sectors when it comes to getting FDI are not allowed from an LLP perspective, are freely allowed from a company perspective. So if you are a company, you can very well do it, but if you are an LLP, you cannot, even with government permission. No FDI in sectors eligible to receive less than 100% FDI. Which are these sectors? FM radio, TV news, multi-brand retail trading, private banks, insurance, print media. Sectors where FDI possible only with government permission. Which are these? Brownfield pharmaceuticals, publishing journals, defense, mining. Sectors not yet opened up for FDI, tobacco and railways. So all of this are examples where LLP FDI is not possible. Investment must be subject to compliance with the LLP Act 2008 also. And pricing, same, capital contribution must be higher than or equal to fair market value as per any internationally accepted pricing methodology. And you can get a CA certificate, cost accountant, or a registered valuer certificate. Payment must be in cash consideration. No consideration other than cash allowed for LLP FDI, even though it is allowed under the LLP Act for domestic investment. For foreign investment, it must be cash only. Pakistani, Bangladeshi entities or citizens cannot invest in LLP, and foreign venture capital investors and foreign portfolio investors cannot invest in an LLP. You cannot convert a company with FDI into LLP or vice versa if it is in a sector where 100% FDI is not possible, or if it is in a sector where there are performance-linked conditions. Coming to portfolio investment. So we looked at these thresholds which are there. Let's look at foreign portfolio investors. Yeah. Schedule 2, registered foreign portfolio investors. Now earlier we were all very familiar with the term FII and sub-accounts of FII, foreign institutional investors. Few years ago, SEBI subsumed the FII regime into an FPI regime. So now we don't have FIIs, we have FPIs. They must be registered with SEBI and you get a 3 years registration at a time. Earlier there were 3 categories, now you have only 2, Cat 1 and Cat 2. Cat 1 are the sovereign wealth funds, government and central banks. So these are all government or quasi-governments. Everybody else is a category 2 foreign portfolio investor. Even NRIs can now be members of foreign portfolio investor. Interesting leeway, entities set up in GIFT City of Ahmedabad, of Gujarat. That's the International Financial Service Center, can also register as a foreign portfolio investor. They can invest in listed shares, shares to be listed pursuant to IPO, follow-on public offer, rights, mergers, or private placement. They need to follow the SEBI FPI regulations of 2019. Now here there's been a change under the NDI regulations. Prior to 31st March 2020, that is just last month, the holding of FPIs in aggregate was allowed till 24% of the capital of the listed company, and each FPI could hold less than 10%, because the moment it holds 10% or more, it becomes FDI, as we saw initially. The 24% aggregate shareholding could be increased to the sectoral caps by us passing a special resolution. If it was a company where there was no sectoral cap, for instance, Wipro, which is in an information technology sector where there is no sectoral cap, theoretically it can have 100% FDI. Look at HDFC, Housing Development Financial Corporation Limited, 74% FDI. ICICI Bank, 72% FDI. FPI. One FPI can invest only up to 9.99% of the capital of the company. From 1st April 2020, all these limits of 24% are done away with. The aggregate limit would be the sectoral cap. So if the sectoral cap is 100%, the limit is 100%. If it is in a sector where FDI is prohibited, that is tobacco or gambling, even then foreign portfolio investment is not prohibited, but the limit is allowed at 24%. So that's a very important bypass. If you are a company operating in online gambling, or you're a company operating an online casino, or you have even a floating casino, for instance, Delta Corp Limited, which is India's only listed gambling company, then it can now get foreign portfolio investment. Although it cannot get FDI, it can get FPI at 24%. the company had a provision of increasing the limits to the sectoral caps prior to 31st March 2020. Now that we have come to April, whatever are the limits would continue. If the FPI breaches the limits, now this is an important provision. Say by error, the FPI ends up owning 9.99 plus, that is 10% shares. Then within 5 trading days from the settlement causing the breach, it must divest the excess shares, or the entire investment would become FDI and FPI cannot make further foreign portfolio investment. That's an important provision to bear in mind. The FPI can also invest in private placement of securities under the portfolio investment route, and it can buy units of infrastructure investment trust, real estate investment trust, or category 3 alternate investment fund. However, if there is any pre-IPO placement to a foreign portfolio investor, then that is treated as FDI. To give you an analogy, there was earlier a lot of conditions attached to real estate FDI. But if it was an IPO where the FDI invested, there were no conditions attached to it. But if it was a pre-IPO placement to FIIs, so that is where Oberoi Realty and Godrej Properties had made a pre-IPO placement, it was treated as FDI and they were required to follow the real estate FDI conditions. But whatever the FPIs invested under the IPO, there were no conditions attached to it. Some examples of companies where FDI is prohibited or conditional, but there is huge foreign portfolio investment. HDFC and NBFC where there's 72%. Future Lifestyle, multi-brand retail trading, has a lot of conditions and approvals, yet it has 22% FPI shareholding. DLF, real estate business, not allowed FDI, allowed FPI. Delta Corp, gambling totally taboo, yet it has 20% FPI. Print media, HT Media Printing, Mint and Hindustan Times, 7% FPI. So these are examples to show that FPI can be used as a bypass to FDI. Similar to FPI by foreign portfolio investors, even non-resident Indians can purchase shares, but here the limits are very limited. Aggregate is 10% for all NRIs put together on a portfolio investment basis. You can hike it up to 24% by passing a special resolution. Per NRI, the limit is only 5%. It must be delivery based, so no futures and options allowed on a portfolio investment. Here there are certain restrictions, not in agricultural, real estate business, farmhouse, nidhi and trading. Schedule 5 deals with investment by other non-resident investors other than FPI and NRIs. The long-term investors can invest in securities based on conditions specified by SEBI and RBI. These are sovereign wealth funds like the Abu Dhabi Investment Trust, endowment funds, pension funds like CalPEP. So there's California Pension Fund, insurance funds based in Canada. They are very popular, and foreign central banks. So these are sovereign or quasi-government institutions which are given certain specific relaxations by SEBI and RBI. Indian depository receipts and ADRs. ADR, as the name suggests, is an American depository receipt. You could also have a GDR, which is anywhere other than global, other than America, or you could have an SDR, which is in Singapore. Giving an example of Wipro, Wipro issues its shares to a foreign depository, say Chase Manhattan based in New York, which issues depository receipts which are traded on NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange, which are bought by US investors. Why this rigmarole? A US investor does not understand India. He is not comfortable with coming and buying shares on NSE, BSE, but he wants to invest in Wipro and several such good companies. So what the Indian company does, it facilitates a shadow share, which is known as a DR, a depository receipt. If it is listed in America on NASDAQ or NYSE, it is treated as ADR. If it is listed on Luxembourg, it is GDR. If it is listed on Singapore Stock Exchange, it is SDR. So now the foreign investor sitting in America says, yeah, I'm happy buying shares traded on NYSE. I know what's happening. I can get a part of Wipro. It's a foreign currency denominated instrument backed by eligible instrument of shares, and the non-resident must be eligible to invest in shares or debentures under the TISPRO or the NDI rules. The governing scheme is the Depository Receipt Schemes of 2014. Any listed company or even private limited company can issue depository receipts. Rediff.com is one example of a private limited company which has issued ADRs way back in 2002. It's a good avenue for e-commerce companies. Currently, there are 13 ADR issues and about 110 GDR issues, and 34 jurisdictions around the world are permitted under the depository receipt scheme for issuing ADR or GDR. What is an IDR? A reverse of an ADR or a GDR. If there's a foreign company which you want to buy shares of, but earlier there was no facility to buy shares of foreign companies other than LRS, the foreign company can get listed in India by virtue of a shadow depository receipt, and you can buy it on BSE or NSE. Give you only example in India, Standard Chartered Bank of UK has issued IDRs in India, which are traded on BSE, NSE. So if you want a part of StanChart PLC, you can buy the IDRs. This too is now being bought back and delisted. So now going forth, IDRs, there would be no IDRs because it's been a flop and nobody has come forth after StanChart, and even StanChart is delisted. NCDs, non-convertible debentures by foreign portfolio investors. Very important avenue for issuing debentures to foreign portfolio investors. I mentioned in the beginning or in some way in the middle of my talk that you cannot issue non-convertible debentures to foreign investors. They would be treated as debt and they have to follow the debt instrument regulations. However, there is a bypass. So in FEMA, there's a very interesting method which we follow. For every rule, there is a bypass which the government gives, and for every bypass, there is a rule which the government gives. So you have to see the stop, go, which applies to you. They have to be listed bonds which are issued by Indian companies. They can have interest and or premium on redemption. Very important. The Indian company can pay fixed or guaranteed returns. When I dealt with valuation, I mentioned no fixed or guaranteed returns. Here you can give fixed or guaranteed returns. Returns can be linked to earnout, cash flow, underlying share valuation, profits of investee company, compounded annual growth rate, even an IRR. So you can say, I'll pay you 15% flat rate, I'll pay you 10% flat rate, all permissible. Full repatriation of interest, capital and principal allowed. A rating agency for the bonds is a must. Even a private limited company can issue listed debentures. Under the SEBI issue of debt regulations 2008, even private limited companies can issue debentures. What is the limit? Interestingly, there is no company-wise limit. It is a country-wise limit. So India as a whole has a limit of 4.24 lakh crores from 1st April 2020. It has been substantially bumped up. It was only 2.70 lakh crores. It has been made 4.24 lakh crore. And it's on the tap. So till 4.24 lakh crores get exhausted, Indian companies can keep issuing bonds to foreign portfolio investors. As on 22nd April 2020, that's a few days ago, only 1.66 lakh crore or 40% of this 4 lakh crore limit was exhausted. Balance 60% is yet available on tap. Interestingly, come 1st October 2020, the ceiling would automatically increase to 5.41 crores. So RBI has already laid down the ceilings as to what will happen when 1st October. So the 4.20 lakh crore limit is only till 30th September. From 1st October 2020, it would automatically go up to 5.41 crore. Once 5.41 crore gets exhausted, if it gets exhausted, then no fresh bond issuance can take place till government increases the ceiling forward. What are the provisions for these bonds? The minimum maturity must be of 3 years, but the FPI can sell domestically before that also. Can invest in maturity of 1 year also, but this cannot exceed 20% of the total investment of the FPI in that sector. Very important, no sectoral restrictions, no ECB restrictions, no all-in cost, no end use, no type of lender, need not be compulsorily converted into compulsorily convertible debentures like equity, and FPI can even buy listed NCDs from the market. Another type of investor who can invest, foreign venture capital investor. So under again the SEBI regulations come into play. So when we look at FPI and when we look at FVCI and we look at investment vehicle, that's the next schedule, we need to also bear in mind SEBI regulations. For everything else, it's only NDI rules and or RBI. Any investment company, asset management company, investment manager, or an investment vehicle floated abroad, not in India, can be registered with SEBI as a foreign venture capital investor. And what will SEBI look at? What is its status? Is it an investment company? Is it a pension fund? Is it a mutual fund? Is it an endowment fund? Is it a charitable entity? The AMC, that is the asset management company, and the investment manager must be abroad. It should be regulated by a foreign regulator, such as Securities Exchange Commission of America or Monetary Authority of Singapore. Have a track record by a banker or be an income taxpayer in that country, and whether it is a fit and proper person. If all these conditions are met, SEBI would grant it registration as an FVCI. FVCI has certain benefits, therefore people may like to come in as FVCI. What can they do? They can invest in optionally convertible or redeemable or optionally convertible debentures of a venture capital undertaking. So again, the restrictions of OCPS and RPS and OCD, which are there for FDI, do not apply to FVCI. Important bypass. However, if it is an investment in equity, then sectoral caps and conditions would apply, but the instrument becomes open. Second bypass, no pricing requirements at the time of investment. Very important. Don't need to follow valuation norms, no internationally accepted pricing methodology. Schedule 7 FVCI is separate from FDI. Now, this is a very, very important procedural requirement which has various substantive ramifications. If the Indian company goes and files FCGPR, it is the single master form for foreign direct investment, it would automatically be treated as FDI and not be allowed the bypasses of FVCI. Hence, very important, if it is foreign venture capital investment, do not follow the FDI channel, do not follow the FDI reporting, and keep it separate. The investor also should maintain two portfolios. One is as a venture capital investor, other is as an FDI investor. What is FDI? He needs to follow the reporting and the valuation that is the company needs to follow. What is venture capital is outside the purview. Which are the sectors which are open for FVCI? Only 10 sectors. Biotech, information technology, nanotech, seed research and development, pharma R&D, dairy, poultry, biofuels, hotel and infrastructure. What is infrastructure? Energy, that is solar, wind and traditional sources, telecom, transport, water, hospitals, school, mining, cold shale and soil testing. Real estate is not part of infrastructure. Very important to bear in mind, because most real estate developers would like to take benefit of this, but it's not a part of infrastructure. However, if it is a startup, that is for these 10, you need to keep the sectoral requirements. But if it is a startup which is recognized by DIPP, then there is no sectoral restriction. Another benefit, you can have assured pricing, guaranteed returns at exit. That is, you can buy them back at a fixed rate IRR. Can transfer investments to residents and non-residents at mutually accepted pricing, no pricing guidelines, and no forms to be filled. So all these are green channels which are available to an FVCI, but not available to a normal FDI investor. This is a table which examines the bifurcation between FDI, foreign venture capital investor, and a foreign portfolio investor investing in non-convertible debentures. Let us look at them very carefully and clearly. Sectoral caps and restrictions applicable for FDI, applicable to FVCI in the 10 sectors, but not if it is in a startup. So if it is in a startup, no sectoral caps, no restrictions. Foreign portfolio investor investing in listed debentures, no restrictions, no caps. Total green channel. It's an expressway. Instrument, equity shares, compulsorily convertible preference, compulsorily convertible debenture, and warrants. Only these allowed for FDI. FVCI can be equity shares, can be unlisted debentures, can be listed debentures, can be preference shares. Foreign portfolio investor, only non-convertible debentures. Only one instrument. Is listing a must? Not for FDI, not for FVCI, Yes for foreign portfolio investment, non-convertible debentures. Is there a cap on interest? Now, no, at all three places. So they are common in that sense. Pricing requirements, internationally accepted pricing methodology, applicable for FDI, not applicable for FVCI, not applicable for foreign portfolio investment, non-convertible debentures. Can they be secured? FDI cannot have any security. Can be in case of FVCI debentures, possible in case of non-convertible debentures, foreign portfolio investment. Exit route, very important. Only buyback or sale in case of FDI. Foreign venture capital investors can be buyback, sale, or redemption. Non-convertible debentures, foreign portfolio investment can be redemption or sale. Lastly, and most important, that's why it's in bold, can you give assured returns? Never in case of FDI. Yes in case of FVCI. Yes in case of foreign portfolio investment, non-convertible debentures. What is assured returns? I will deal with in a little time to give you more clarity on that. Investment vehicle, different types of investment vehicles possible. Alternate investment fund category 1, 2, and 3 governed by SEBI regulations. Real estate investment trust governed by SEBI. Investment infrastructure trust governed by SEBI, and equity mutual fund which was there but which has been deleted with effect from December, retrospectively from October 2019. Investment vehicle is an Indian vehicle which pools investments and makes downstream investment in portfolio companies, and it should be registered with SEBI. Two conditions: registered with SEBI, pooling into downstream Indian companies. Who are eligible other than foreign portfolio investment? Only non-residents of Pakistani and Bangladeshi are not eligible. Otherwise, everybody can invest in an investment vehicle. Give you an example of a REIT. There are non-resident investors, there are sponsors, trustees, AMC, and the REIT in turn holds shares of a special purpose vehicle or directly owns real estate company. So you can have non-resident investors. The only REIT in India is Blackstone Embassy Office Parks REIT, where about 33 million square feet of office space is there in the REIT. Over 55% of the promoter holding is foreign, which is owned by Blackstone, and 15% of the public is foreign. So total 70% of the REIT is foreign held. Infrastructure trust, InvIT, similar to a REIT, but it is for infrastructure projects like road projects and port, airport, telecom. Jio now has a REIT, an InvIT, which it has done for California Investment Trust. Listed REIT, listed InvIT, you have three: IRB, India Grid, and India InfraVIT. 38 to 50% or 20 to 50% of these InvITs are held by foreign portfolio investors. One is for road, one is for power, and third is for infrastructure held by L&T. AIFs, very popular now. You have a sponsor, you have a trustee, AMC, and you could have category 1, which are venture capital funds, small and medium enterprises, category 2, PE and debt funds, and category 3, which are hedge funds. Now, why are investment vehicles very popular? Here, they have given a total bypass. It's not even an expressway, it's an autobahn as you have it in Germany. There is no speed limit altogether, no roadblocks. As long as three conditions are met: the sponsor, the asset management company, and the investment advisor. All three are owned and controlled by resident Indian citizens. Again, coming back to ownership, controlled by resident Indian citizens, same as we understood under indirect FDI. As long as these three entities, sponsor, AMC, and investment advisor, are owned and controlled by resident Indian citizens, whatever investment is made downstream is treated as domestic. Extent of foreign investment in the corpus, that is the AIF's main investors, is irrelevant. It could be entirely owned by, entire investment could be by non-residents, yet the downstream investment would be treated as domestic. So to give you an example, if AIF is set up and the AMC, the sponsors are 50%, that is 51% owned by Indian residents and 49% owned by foreign investors, and control is with the foreign investors, the majority control is with the Indian investor, Whatever is made downstream is treated as domestic. You don't have to see how much units are owned by non-resident. But if the AIF is set up by, say, an Indian foreign institution like HDFC, which has over 75% foreign shareholding, then the investment by such AIF is treated as foreign, because the ultimate ownership of the sponsor of the AMC is not with resident Indian citizens. It is with foreign shareholders. So what do you look at? Do not look at the corpus. Do not look at the downstream. Only look at the sponsor, AMC, and investment advisor. If they are Indian, everything is Indian. If they are not Indian, everything is indirect FDI. If any one of these are owned and controlled by non-resident, what are the ramifications? Investment in the portfolio companies must conform to sectoral caps, pricing, valuation, reporting, all that which is applicable to FDI under Schedule 1. And they must have it as if it is directly coming from abroad into the Indian company. Don't look at the investment vehicle. But if it is via investment vehicle owned and controlled by Indian citizens, then you don't need to bother about any of these. Coming to transfer of shares. So we looked at the various schedules 2 to 10 in addition to schedule 1. Now let us look at the transfer of shares to a person resident outside India. If there is a person resident outside India, other than a non-resident Indian or an overseas citizen of Indian who is the seller, and the buyer is any PROI, any person resident outside India, including an NRI or an OCI, it's an automatic route for selling or gifting shares. There are no pricing guidelines. But if the buyer is a foreign portfolio investor and he buys 10% or more, then he must divest the excess within 5 working days, or else it would be treated as FDI. So very important, any seller other than NRI, buyer is any NRI, any non-resident, no pricing, no approval required, nothing to be done. If there is an NRI seller and the buyer is any non-resident, then selling and gifting is on automatic, no pricing guidelines, no approvals required. But if the buyer is a non-resident Indian who buys 5% or more, then he must divest the excess within 5 working days, else the entire will be treated as in breach of the conditions. So here the limit is 5 per person. In FPI it is 10 per person. Resident seller or non-resident seller owning on non-repatriation, both are treated at par, because non-resident or non-repatriation we have seen as domestic investment. If they sell to any non-resident, then sell is automatic, but they must follow the pricing guidelines. What are the pricing guidelines? We'll deal with in the next slide. Resident or non-resident on non-repatriable basis wanting to gift shares to any non-resident. Very important. This is something where there are lots of violations by people. People think gift is on an automatic route. No. Till a few years ago, it was on an automatic route. Now there are various caveats attached by RBI. You need RBI permission for making a gift to a non-resident. It can only be to close relatives, and close relatives are defined. It cannot exceed $50,000 US value in a year, and it cannot exceed 5% of the capital of the company whose shares are being gifted in aggregate. So very important to bear in mind these conditions when you make a gift, that you have to look at getting prior RBI permission. You cannot do it on an automatic route. If you do, there would be various compounding penalties which RBI would apply. Non-resident or non-repatriable basis, gifting to another non-resident or non-repatriable basis allowed, and here there are no conditions attached to it because it's on a domestic to domestic. Now what if it's an indirect FDI case? We looked at company owned and controlled by non-resident, that is a foreign owned company controlled by non-resident. If it is an indirect Indian company owned and controlled by non-resident, which is owning a second level company shares, and that is selling it to a non-resident, then you need to file forms with RBI after the sale, and there are no pricing guidelines because it is deemed to be a non-resident to a non-resident transfer. However, if the seller is an Indian company owned and controlled by non-resident, selling the second level company shares to a resident buyer, then it is treated as a non-resident to a resident transfer, and there is no reporting, but there are pricing guidelines. And if there are two Indian companies, both owned and controlled as the seller and the buyer, then there is no reporting, there are no pricing guidelines. Now I kept mentioning pricing guidelines. So what are the pricing guidelines? Minimum price for transfer by resident to non-resident is the fair market value as on the date of transfer. This is the minimum. You can always go above that. Listed company, price worked out as per SEBI guidelines. However, not applicable in case of a buyback, delisting or takeover in accordance with SEBI regulations, because then you are given different pricing guidelines. Unlisted company, you need to follow internationally accepted pricing methodology. So again, arm's length pricing as per a CA or a merchant banker, and you need to follow the pricing guidelines which are mentioned for that. So again, you can have DCF, book value, earnings method, comparable company basis, etc. How must the consideration be paid? Consideration has to be paid immediately, but there is a leeway. Deferred consideration is allowed by a non-resident buyer. Up to 25% of the total consideration could be deferred and or can be parked in an escrow agreement for a period of 18 months from the date of the share purchase agreement. So if you enter a share purchase agreement on 1st January 2020 for $100 million, $18 million can be deferred up to a period of 18 months. That's 30th June 2021 is the last date by which the 18 million needs to be paid, by which 25% can be deferred. That is 25 million. 75 million needs to be paid immediately. Balance can be deferred. And the seller can also give indemnity for 18 months if full consideration is paid. So you could also have a situation where 100 million is paid today, but the seller gives an indemnity for maximum 18 months if the full consideration is paid. But very important, that is the total consideration finally paid, 75 today and 25 within 18 months must be as per the pricing guidelines. You cannot say that the balance 25 is out of the pricing guidelines. So this is called a deferred consideration mechanism, very important for PE deals and venture capital deals. Options and guaranteed returns have had a very checkered history. That is, they have been allowed, not allowed, and have had court cases also. Now they are expressly permissible. So you can have a put and call option. Minimum 1 year lock-in period or higher if prescribed for the sector. Again, no assured returns, exit price as per FMV valuation to be done. What is a put and call option? Now look at this as a company, which is an unlisted company. It has given, it's got 70 or 80% Indian promoter holding and 20% FDI. After, ultimately, what is the aim of any investment? To make money. Now, when the time comes for exit, there's no money left in the company because it's made losses or whatever be the case. How does the investor exit? If he has a put option, he may put his 20% on the Indian promoter and tell him, look here, this is part of the terms of investment. I want you to buy out my shares because the company doesn't have money to buy me out. So the Indian promoter will buy out those shares because of the put option which the investor has. Now it is expressly allowed that you can have a put option on Indian promoters, but there must be a minimum 1 year lock-in. That is, you must own the shares for a minimum of 1 year. And very important that you cannot have assured returns or pricing has to be as per FMV. That is, on exit, whatever is the fair market value, you can only pay that much and not higher. Guaranteed returns are not permissible even if contractually agreed upon. So even if the Indian promoter and the foreign investor agree upon a guaranteed return that you will get a fixed 15% IRR, you cannot pay that. But there is a bypass to that. In a host of decisions, City Cruise versus Unitech, NTT Docomo versus Tata Sons, the Delhi High Court has held that foreign arbitration awards granting fixed IRR in the form of liquidated damages for shareholders agreement violation by Indian promoters is allowed. So if it is guaranteed return, it is not allowed. But if it is liquidated damage for shareholder agreement violation, it is allowed. Even though they are not expressly permissible under FEMA, even though RBI objected, the Delhi High Court overruled the objections, and in both these cases and several other cases, payment for liquidated damages was made. Hence the distinction: damages must be for downside protection for shareholder violation and must not be for assured return. You may ask, what is the difference? Is there not a fig leaf difference between the two? Answer is maybe, and it requires very clear and clever drafting to ensure that what the foreign investor is being paid is not assured returns, in which case no court would allow, but if it is liquidated damages, they would be allowed based on these decisions. Conclusion before we get on to questions and answers. There are restricted sectors, sectoral caps, and FDI conditions which are not applicable to the following. NRI investment on non-repatriable basis, it's treated as domestic and there are no limits. Repatriable portfolio investment by foreign portfolio investment, no limits. Only if they are in taboo sectors, there is a 24% limit. Indirect foreign investment via AIFs, provided the control and ownership of the AIF is with Indian, no limits because it is treated as domestic. One case study which would elaborate what I mentioned just now. Although the deal did not fructify, the structuring was done and they had gone ahead, but then because of certain other issues, they did not go through. The Aditya Birla Retail Limited owned more brand of multi-brand retail trading outlets. So there were supermarkets, 575 supermarkets owned by Aditya Birla Retail Company, which in turn was owned by two private limited companies of the Birla Group, RKN Retail and Kanishta. Amazon, the big daddy of e-commerce, wanted to acquire more, but FDI up to 51% is allowed in multi-brand retail trading. More, as the name suggests, is into multi-brand. It has various brands which it trades, and it requires government plus state government approval, and there are a variety of conditions. So what did Amazon do? It used an existing facility management company of its own, invested only 49% in that, and balance 51% was owned by Samara Capital AIF. It's a category 2 AIF, where the sponsor, AMC, and investment manager are entirely owned and controlled by resident Indian citizens. Entire corpus of Samara was owned by US offices, but that was irrelevant because Samara was treated as owned and controlled by Indian citizens, and therefore the 51% held in Vitzik was treated as domestic. Vitzik, being a domestic company, who acquired 100% shares of Aditya Birla Retail. Samara owned and controlled by Indians, so 51% in Vitzik owned and controlled by Indians. So Vitzik is a domestic company, and the downstream investment in Aditya Birla Retail is not indirect FDI, did not require approval of state government for multi-brand retail trading FDI. This was the final structure which was proposed. So ABWA was to sell 100% stake in Aditya Birla Retail for 4,200 crores to Vitzik. 49% came from Amazon, 51% ownership by Samara, entirely funded by Amazon. This would have been the final structure had the deal materialized. 49-51 Vitzik, and Vitzik 100% owner of Aditya Birla Retail. Aditya Birla Retail owning 575 supermarkets of more, which would have given Amazon both back-end and front-end visibility into multi-brand retail trading, and it could have used that for enhancing its B2C. So this, friends, in a nutshell, is FDI regulations under NDI rules, and it covers Schedule 1 to Schedule 10 and the other modes. Now, if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them. Mayur bhai, how do we go ahead further, please?
Anup, I have shortlisted certain questions. I will ask you, and then you can answer them.
Yeah.
So there are numerous questions. Like really, it cannot be taken up in this session. But let me see. So there is one question from Aarti for reporting downstream investment. Is there a reporting compliance to be filed with DIPP, or only filing with RBI would be suffice?
So there's the single master form DI, and also DIPP needs to be intimated. So both of that.
Okay, thank you. Then can right issue
and the valuation norms?
Yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah. Yeah, and the valuation norms, if they are applicable, which they will be, then you need to fill the valuation form also.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So there is one question from Sanjay Mehta. Can right issue be priced at par when there is 100% foreign ownership?
If it's a listed company, SEBI gives you free pricing flexibility. So well, it's 100% foreign ownership. So then it would be an wholly owned subsidiary. Yes, then rights could be at par, because the only condition is that the rights should not be at a price lower than the price given to Indian residents.
Right. Got it.
But then and if it is at 100%, then 56(2) will also not apply of income tax. So yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. There is one question from Mr. K. Prasanna. Whether inbound merger is possible? That is one first question. FEMA notification does not cover demerger under the ambit of cross-border merger.
Yes, that's an interesting question. So there is a separate regulation, cross-border mergers and regulations 2019, which RBI has issued, by virtue of which inbound mergers are possible. That is, a foreign company can merge into an Indian company, and outbound is also possible. That is, a Indian company can merge into a foreign company. Unfortunately, demergers, although it is within the purview, but the regulations are silent on it, and there is no clarity on whether demerger is possible. Having said that, when there were no express regulations under the Companies Act 1956, Keynes of Australia had demerged its oil mills into an Indian company, and that was possible under the Companies Act 1956 with RBI permission. I don't see any reason why RBI should create a hurdle for the same.
Okay. There is a question from Sanjay. Is investment on non-repatriable basis permitted in FDI prohibited sectors?
Yes, only the taboo sectors which I laid down: agricultural, plantation, nidhi, chit fund, and real estate business. That's the taboo list, not the taboo list which is there in FDI Schedule 1.
All right. Yeah. So one more question. You said real estate is not permissible in LLP, but same is allowed in company. Does it mean even development of township by LLP is not permissible?
Yes. There is a clear stepmotherly treatment to real estate, to LLPs.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Anubhai, question on the DI, that is the downstream investment. There was one more question on the chat, whereby if there is 100% downstream investment, DI captures what is the percentage of holding in the first level investment company.
Yes.
So if there is no further downstream investment, but if there is an investment at the first level Indian company, whether DI again needs to be revised.
So there is no further investment downstream, you are saying?
Yeah, there is an Indian Co 1 and there is an Indian Co 2.
Okay.
So if there is an investment by Indoco 1 to Indoco 2, you need to file Form DI.
Correct.
But when there is a change in the holding of Indoco 1,
then you would file the single master form FCGPR. So it would be at that level.
Yes, there is no mechanism at the DI level.
Correct.
But RBI is taking a view that you need to capture it again.
Yes, but I don't subscribe to that view, although what you say is right. Because once I'm filing FCGPR, I have done my compliance at that first level.
Because if there is any change at this level 2, the ultimate responsibility is on the Indco 1 level.
Yes.
Thanks. Kirit, there are 2-3 more questions you will take.
Yeah, there are questions. Yeah, you can take up all the questions.
Rajesh, you can ask a question. I have a couple of them, but then you can also ask.
Okay. So there is a question. We will restrict to today's topic. We will not go to the case for opinion. Okay. Whether company receiving FDI investing in a domestic LLP controlled by foreign partner is indirect foreign investment.
Whether company receiving FDI?
Whether
Come again?
FDI
and the domestic LLP.
Foreign direct investment received in an Indian company, that Indian company investing into a domestic LLP controlled by foreign partners is indirect foreign investment.
Controlled by foreign partners.
The company is controlled by foreign partners or company?
Both.
So then it would be indirect.
It will be considered as an indirect.
Indirect, yeah.
In Schedule 4, which permits overseas trust owned and controlled by NRIs, how to define the same in the case of a discretionary trust?
Very difficult question, sir, but I think look at the trust. If the trustees majority are non-resident Indians, then you can say they are controlled by trustees, and ownership. You are right that in case of a discretionary trust, how would you determine the corpus? But in that case also, I would go by the trustees' constitution only and look at it.
So you will go by the trustees' constitution and not the beneficiaries' constitution.
Yes, because you don't know. If there is a case where some are NRIs and some are not, then this question would be relevant from a corpus perspective. If everybody is an NRI, then only look at the trustees' constitution. But where there are, say one of them maybe a PIO or maybe a foreign individual or a charity trust, normally you may have someone like a Red Cross as a beneficiary. Then what happens? Then how do you determine majority owned and controlled? Then you only go by trustees. That's the only, I would not say the best answer, but it's the most logical answer.
Rajesh, there are a few questions on my screen. Can I ask? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So there is a question from Amar Naik. It says that to his mind, foreign investment is allowed in LLP and not FDI, since both terms have been defined separately. Further, ECB is not allowed into LLP because that FDI is not allowed to LLP, which was clarified by RBI in FAQs on ECB. Is this view correct? He is just asking.
So what is the first thing you mentioned? Foreign direct investment?
He says that foreign investment is separate and foreign direct investment is separate. So what is allowed in LLP? Foreign investment and not foreign direct investment.
But what is the mode of foreign investment? There is no other mode other than capital contribution. See, an LLP cannot issue shares, cannot issue units, cannot issue debentures. Just as I mentioned in case of a company, FDI is separate, but you could have other foreign investment in the form of non-convertible debentures or domestic preference shares. In case of an LLP, there is only one mechanism, that is contribution to capital. Now, if that is blocked for performance-linked condition, then everything else gets blocked.
One question is that does PMLA have a role to play when talking about beneficial ownership under recent FDI amendment?
Yes, you could look at the Money Laundering Act also for interpretation of beneficial ownership. But I would go more by the Companies Act statute.
Another question is that for the downstream investment, whether downstream funding by way of debt is covered in downstream regulations?
It's not allowed because you cannot raise funds from India by any mechanism. The only mechanism is foreign FDI or internal accruals. Foreign debt is allowed.
Foreign debt is allowed. Whether foreign fund raised earlier can be used or it should be fresh funds only?
No. Foreign funds raised, yeah, that is allowed. That would be allowed. But then you should have clear bifurcation and all of that.
And whether FPI is PC carved out from FDI?
Yes.
If it exceeds rupees 5,000 crore, whether CCA approval is required?
No. But you would not have any FPI buying 5,000 crores. But if it does, then there's no requirement. This is only under Schedule 1.
Question is that what happens in case of merger when NCDs are issued? Will it be tax neutral for transferor company?
This is out of syllabus question.
Okay, so we can. I understand.
But we can. Answer is no. It would not be tax neutral unless you also issue shares.
I think I'm done.
So you can look at the Madras High Court decision. Yeah.
Mayur bhai, there is one more question.
Yeah, you can answer.
NDI regulation has been amended to introduce regulation 7A on renunciation just day before yesterday. how will the shares be issued at a different price for right shares and renunciation shares?
So what that 7A says that if you have renounced your rights, then you can apply for fresh shares again. So what it is saying that if you have renounced your rights and now you are back to not having any rights entitlement window, then you can again use that to buy shares. I don't think there was any need for that. It's more of a clarificatory amendment in nature. So if I'm entitled to 200 shares, I renounced my 200 shares and now I want to again go back and buy those 200, I can do that.
There are two more questions. The valuation report which is issued, how many days it is valid?
Very difficult. Earlier, we have taken a stand that 6 months validity. But now going forth, I've seen there are cases where authorized dealers also require saying that no, it's too old, especially in the case of DCF. So 3 months should seem reasonable. Unless there are certain drastic changes in your projections or some event which has happened, then it may be a different story.
Now, in NDA rules, issue of shares for the receivable is allowed. Payable, I mean to say.
Yeah.
So whether this payable includes services?
So export of goods and services, yes, it should be allowed.
So even for the services, it will be allowed. Because for services, there is no documentary evidence or anything, except the confirmation from the director of the company.
Right.
Anup bhai, whether management consultancy amounts to other financial sector, and if LLP carrying consultancy activities, whether it can receive FDI?
So depends on the type of management consultancy. Okay. If it is say mergers and acquisitions advisory, where you are giving advice on structuring, where you're giving advice on legal and financial aspects, I don't think it is other financial services. But if you are giving management advisory consultancy on investment perspective, where to invest, how much to invest, how to decide, then it would be treated as part of financial services. So you will have to go to the root of the type of advisory and then take a call.
I think we have touched 8 o'clock, Rajesh. I think it's a very, very enlightening session by Anup. But thanks a lot. Rajesh, would you like to propose a well-deserved word of thanks?
Yes. Anup bhai, on behalf of the Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, which is your home institution, and the International Taxation Committee, Chairman, Convener, the coordinators, we all and the 400 participants are proposing the hearty vote of thanks to be carried out with a light applause with at their own residence. The request from all the participants, if you can just share the PPT, it will be beneficial to all.
Okay.
So friends, thank you very much. We have completed as per 8 o'clock, and tomorrow see you again at 10:30 for the next session, technical session number 3. Thank you everybody.